You've probably assumed at some point that some inequality is just natural, that it's always existed in some form because people are different, and different people end up with different amounts. Here's a fact that should make you question that immediately. In Russia, in a grave over 34,000 years old, archaeologists found two children, roughly 10 and 12 years old, buried with them, over 10,000 mammoth ivory beads each. Ivory spears, fox teeth by the hundred. More wealth than anyone else at the entire site. More specifically than a healthy adult man buried nearby, someone who'd had decades longer to earn status through hunting, skill, contribution. Both children were disabled. Neither had lived long enough or been physically able enough to have earned any of it themselves. They were born into it, 34,000 years ago. So the question isn't really where inequality came from. It's why you've been told it took, until recently, to show up. Because for most of the time humans have existed, the actual record shows something closer to the opposite of what you'd expect. In many hunter-gatherer societies, studied directly by anthropologists who lived alongside them, equality wasn't the absence of hierarchy. It was a full-time job of actively preventing one. There's a documented practice among Kalahari hunter-gatherers called, bluntly, insulting the meat. When a skilled hunter brought back a large kill, the rest of the group didn't praise him. They mocked the meat, called it worthless, a bag of bones. One hunter explained it directly to the anthropologist studying them. When a man starts thinking of himself as a chief, and the rest of us as his servants, we cool his heart. We make him gentle. That's not a quaint custom. That's a functioning political system, actively suppressing the exact thing you've assumed was inevitable. Try to dominate the group in societies like this, and the group doesn't tolerate it quietly. Mockery first, then exclusion. Then, if it kept happening, expulsion entirely. For the vast majority of human history, that was the actual default. Enforced equality, defended constantly against anyone who tried to rise above it. So if it wasn't always there, and it wasn't simply human nature asserting itself, something specific had to change. The archaeological record points to a surprisingly unglamorous answer, staying in one place. Around 12,800 years ago, in what's now the Middle East, a culture called the Natufians started doing something most humans hadn't done before at scale. They stopped moving, small clusters of huts, semi-permanent settlements. And this is the detail that should surprise you. They weren't farming yet, but the graves already show it. Differences in height between individuals, differences in the goods buried with them, differences in the size of the homes they lived in. The hierarchy showed up before the crops did. Moving constantly, a hunter-gatherer group can't accumulate much. You carry what you own. Excess is a burden, not an asset. Stop moving, and suddenly a surplus can sit somewhere, be defended, be inherited, passed from one generation directly into the next, compounding instead of resetting. Once people are staying in one place, keeping more than they need stops being pointless. It starts being power. Then agriculture arrived, and whatever crack had opened, agriculture forced wide open. Researchers have measured this directly, using house size as a proxy for wealth, the same way it's used in the present. In hunter-gatherer societies studied this way, inequality scores this low, roughly 17 out of 100, close to genuinely flat. In early farming societies, that number jumps to somewhere between 35 and 46, more than double, sometimes nearly triple. Land you could own, livestock you could accumulate, a harvest you could hoard while your neighbors failed. None of that existed as a lasting concept before you could actually stay still long enough to hold onto it. Property didn't just describe inequality once it existed. Property is very likely what let it exist at all. Here's what should genuinely unsettle you. None of this required villains. No single tyrant invented hierarchy on purpose. It emerged quietly, the moment settling down made keeping more than your share possible, and every generation after that inherited the arrangement a little further along. The default your entire life has run on, that some people simply end up with more, isn't the ancient baseline. It's the exception that eventually became normal enough to stop noticing. The actual baseline, for most of the time humans have existed, was a group of people actively, deliberately, sometimes viciously making sure nobody got the chance. You didn't inherit inequality because it's natural. You inherited it because, at some specific point, staying still made it possible, and nobody built a Kalahari-style mechanism strong enough to stop it once it started. Two disabled children, buried in more wealth than anyone else at their entire site. 34,000 years ago weren't an early glimpse of something universal. They were one of the first cracks in something humans had spent far longer actively holding together.
Ah, I understand. Follow, and see you next time. For another thing, you'll never look at the same way again.